Part 3. Daylight was full in the windows now. Mary made herself get up and extinguish the lamp on the table. The lamps all needed to be cleaned and trimmed and refilled, and she had planned to do that today. The whole house needed to be dusted and swept, and she had mending to do. She tied a scarf around her head, put on her coat, and went out. Only day before yesterday it had been spring, warm, sunny, and still. Elton said the wildflowers were starting up in the leafless woods, and she found a yellow crocus in the yard. And then this dry and bitter wind had come, driving down from the north as if it were as long and wide as time, and the sky was as gray as if the sun had never shone. The wind went through her coat, pressed her fluttering skirt tight against her legs, tore at her scarf. It chilled her to the bone. She went first to the privy in a back corner of the yard, and then on to the hen house, where she shelled corn for the hens and gave them fresh water. On her way back to the house, she stood a moment, looking off in the direction in which she knew Elton and Walter Cotman were plowing. By now they would have accepted even this day as it was. By now they might have shed their jackets. Later they would go in and wash and sit down in Thumb's warm kitchen for their dinner, hungry, glad to be at rest for a little while before going back again to work through the long afternoon. Though they were not far away, though she could see them in her mind's eye, their day and hers seemed estranged, divided by great distance and long time. She was cold, and the wind's insistence wearied her. The wind was like a living creature, rearing and pressing against her, so that she might have cried out to it in exasperation, "What do you want?" When she got back into the house, she was shivering, her teeth chattering. She unbuttoned her coat without taking it off and sat down close to the stove. They heated only 2 rooms, the kitchen and the front room where they slept. The stove in the front room might be warmer, she thought, and she could sit in the rocking chair by it. But having already sat down, she did not get up. She had much that she needed to be doing, she told herself. She ought at least to get up and make the bed. And she wanted to tend to the lamps. It always pleased her to have them clean, but she did not get up. The stove's heat drove the cold out of her clothes, and gradually her shivering stopped. They had had a hard enough time of it their first winter. They had no fuel, no food laid up. Elton had raised a crop, but no garden. He borrowed against the crop to buy a meat hog. He cut and hauled in firewood. He worked for wages to buy groceries. But the times were hard, and he could not always find work. Sometimes their meals consisted of biscuits and a gravy made of lard and flour. And yet they were often happy. Often the world afforded them something to laugh about. Elton stayed alert for anything that was funny and brought the stories home. He told her how the tickle-ass grass got into Uncle Isham's pants, and how Daisy Hample clucked to her nearsighted husband and children like a hen with half-grown chicks, and how Jonah Hample, missing the steps, walked off the edge of Bramer Hardy's front porch, fell into a rose bush, and said, "No, I didn't go to do that." Elton could make the funny things happen again in the dark as they lay in bed at night. Sometimes they would laugh until their eyes were wet with tears. When they got snowed in that winter, they would drive the old car down the hill until it stalled in the drifts, and drag it out with the team, and ram it into the drifts again, laughing until the horses looked at them and wondered. When the next year came, they began at the beginning, and though the times had not improved, they improved themselves. They bought a few hens and a rooster from Josie Bramer. They bought a second cow. They put in a garden. They bought 2 shoats to raise for meat. Mary learned to preserve the food they would need for winter. When the cows freshened, she learned to milk. She took a small bucket of cream and a few eggs to Port William every Saturday night, and used the money she made to buy groceries and to pay on their debts. Slowly she learned to imagine where she was. The ridge named for Walter Cotman's family is a long one, curving out toward the river between the 2 creek valleys of Willow Run and Katie's Branch. As it comes near to the river valley, it gets narrower, its sides steeper and more deeply incised by hollows. When Elton and Mary Penn were making their beginnings there, the uplands were divided into many farms, few of which contained as much as 100 acres. The hollows, the steeper hillsides, the bluffs along the sides of the two creek valleys were covered in thicket or woods. From where the hawks saw it, the ridge would have seemed a long, irregular promontory reaching out into a sea of trees, and it bore on its back criss-crossings of other trees along the stone or rail or wire fences, trees in thickets and groves, trees in the house yards. And on rises of ground or tucked into folds were the gray, paintless buildings of the farmsteads, connected to one another by lanes and paths. Now she thought of herself as belonging there, not just because of her marriage to Elton, but also because of the economy that the two of them had made around themselves and with their neighbors. She had learned to think of herself as living and working at the center of a wonderful provisioning. The kitchen and garden, hog pen and smokehouse, hen house and cellar of her own household. The little commerce of giving and taking that spoked out along the paths connecting her household to the others. Port William on its ridge top in one direction, Goforth in its valley in the other. And all this at the heart of the weather and the world. On a bright, still day in the late fall, after the leaves were down, she had stood on the highest point and had seen the six smokes of the six houses rising straight up into the wide downfalling light. She knew which smoke came from which house. It was like watching the rising up of prayers or some less acknowledged communication between earth and heaven. She could not say to herself how it made her feel. She loved her jars of vegetables and preserves on the cellar shelves, and the potato bin beneath, the cured hams and shoulders and bacons hanging in the smokehouse, the two hens already brooding in their clutches of marked eggs, the egg basket, and the cream bucket slowly filling, week after week. But today these things seemed precious and far away, as if remembered from another world or another life. Her sickness made things seem arbitrary and awry. Nothing had to be the way it was. As easily as she could see the house as it was, she could imagine it empty and windowless. The tin roof blowing away, the chimneys crumbling, the cellar caved in, weeds in the yard. She could imagine Elton and herself gone, and the rest of them, Hardy, Hample, Copman, and Quayle, gone too.